Hello, welcome back. I'm Robin Gibson, and this is the Harvard House Money Morsel. Thank you for joining us today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the bell so that you get a notification of when we release a video. Today I'm sitting with Michael Porter, Chief Investment Officer. Hello, Michael. How are you doing?
Robin. Fine, thank you.
We have been asked a question by a viewer, and we would encourage you to put your comments in the questions below, and we might be able to pick up on that in future videos. But Michael, the question is really about Harvard House has always said that property is a great way to hedge against inflation in your income. I know you've just been on this overseas tour with the property companies. Can you just talk about, in this inflationary environment, how do landlords cope with rising inflation and how do they hand that on to the investors?
Sure. Good morning, Robin. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Well, first of all, Robin, I think you've got to remember that leases are signed with an escalation clause built into it. So if you sign a 10-year lease, there will be an annual escalation in the rent, certainly in South Africa. Overseas, it is a little bit differences. Each country has slight nuances, but you do have an annual escalation in the lease. So over the last 10 years, escalation rates have actually come down. I mean, 10 years ago, they were probably 8%. Now they might be 6 or 5%. So actually, a little bit of inflation helps the landlord when they're renewing leases to actually push for a higher annual escalation. So landlords do get a rising rental every year. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you've got to remember that inflation sort of works both ways. Inflation in building costs is rampant at the moment. Steel, cement, a range of materials. So what that immediately does is it brings to a halt all new supply. That's not certainly speculative supply. You're not going to build something on spec because the risk is greater that you're going to not have it let. Secondly, then, if there's not a lot of supply coming out, then basically that excess demand gets soaked up. And if you think about the cost of building a new project and the rent that you require to justify that, if existing rents are way below that, then eventually that gap will close. So it is a lead and a lag, but essentially new supply falls, vacancies basically drop, and rents rise to fill that space. So there is a lead and a lag, Robin, but that's basically how you protect against inflation. And income does rise. Obviously, on the other side, landlords are facing rising costs themselves in terms of rates or electricity or water and things like that. But obviously, the rental covers that and is there to compensate for that, the rise in rental.
So maybe a question, just bringing it back to the South African sphere. I mean, obviously, we've seen and read extensively that rates and taxes have escalated at way above inflation. Government's hungry. Load shedding is a major issue, and you're having to invest in order to give electricity. Is there any hope for the landlords in this sector to sort of improve the returns back to shareholders with all these headwinds that they're facing?
Yeah, listen, it hasn't been an easy time for property, and I think rates and taxes and the disputes around rates and taxes is a major issue for landlords at the moment. I mean, it's quite well documented what's been happening in Joburg and with the municipality and the disputes around rateable values and things like that. But on the load shedding, listen, it's a very topical issue. Obviously, I think on the office sector, load shedding is really, really difficult. You do have big generators. Most of the landlords have got generators at their big office buildings, but it costs probably 3 times the running cost to run a generator versus electricity from the grid.
Wow.
So in the short term, whether it's the tenant or the landlord paying that, it's probably the tenant paying that. Quite honestly, but you can see the pressure that comes through for the economy as a whole when we have load shedding of this magnitude. Secondly, though, I think especially in the shopping centre market, landlords have been extremely proactive over the last 5 years in installing rooftop solar on shopping centres. Resilient is probably the market leader in this space. I think they supply 10 to 15% of their own power and they're hoping to get to 25% by the end of the year or next year, with a view to getting much higher than that. What I didn't realize in chatting with Resilient the other day and on a management call was that even to put solar on a shopping center, you need municipal approval for that.
Okay.
And the municipalities are often quite reluctant to give that approval because that's actually a good payer. That's the guy that pays the electricity account, and they don't want to lose that revenue. So, but I mean, they do get approvals, and in addition, the technology is improving, and everybody's rolling out solar, which is essentially reducing the pressure on the grid. So, I think companies are really, really proactive in installing green power. And what happens with the solar power? So not only do you essentially get more consistent supply, but for the landlord, you sell that electricity onto the tenant at a cheaper price than necessarily what Eskom is charging you. So the landlord gets a little bit of revenue and obviously justifies the capex that they've spent on that solar project. Okay. But also the tenant is happier because he's got a better working environment. And so you actually can then, through your rental, demand a slightly higher rental because you've got a premium. You're essentially offering premium space.
Yes.
It's not just about the location. It's actually about the consistency of supply and the consistency of trading that allows you to charge a higher rental. So landlords are proactive. There's some very good management teams in this country. It's not easy, but management's there to solve problems, and they solve it.
And Michael, last question before we run out of time. I know we are short, but with the drop in property values, do we see a bit of a conflict coming between the landlords and the local municipalities in terms of rates? I mean, they've had massive rate increases over the last number of years. That surely can't be sustainable. There must be some pushback there, which will benefit end investors.
Sorry, are you talking residential or industrial?
No, I'm talking the industrial. The corporate.
Listen, I don't think property values fluctuate that hugely, and I think unfortunately, inflation, as we discussed earlier, does underpin essentially. I mean, replacement cost for these assets is a lot higher than actually where the valuation is. So listen, I mean, there are issues where valuations are out of line with municipal valuations are out of line with what the companies say the valuations are. But yeah, Robin, I don't think I think the companies manage that and they deal with it, and it's part of the process. So it does push up your operating costs because you spend more time. You've got to hire some people, you've got to litigate, you've got to sort it out, which, as opposed to just focusing on running your business. It's a stress that they don't need. Yeah. But quite honestly, in the end, that the landlords actually come out on top because the municipalities don't really have a leg to stand on. So once it gets to that challenge phase, it generally works out in the landlord's favor.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thank you so much for giving us a deeper insight into the dynamics of the property sector. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.